Global Justice Voices Podcast, The Leadership Chronicles.
Happy New Year to our valuable listeners, and welcome back to the Global Justice Voices Podcast. I know, it's strange to be wishing you Happy New Year at this time of the year, but that is due to reasons beyond our control. We couldn't return much earlier. But as they say, better late than never. So here we are. So it's an official welcome back from us, me and my colleagues, Luiz and Florence. Luiz from Brazil and Florence from Kenya, and I am Malisa. I am from Zambia. We say welcome back to the Global Justice Voices Podcast, the only show that delves into pressing issues concerning justice, equality, and human rights worldwide. We are back with a bang after a much-needed break where we had to recharge our batteries during the festive period and afterwards. So today we are going to talk about femicide. Yes, we are going to talk about the unfortunate phenomenon called femicide, which is one of the most horrendous forms of gender-based violence that can ever happen on this planet.
Horrendous. Now that's a word to use to define what this femicide situation is. Thank you so much, Malisa, for that warm welcome. We are so glad to be back. We've missed you so much. It's been such a whirlwind of events from the Humphrey Fellowship. We have been traveling. We've been to New York, to New Orleans, and even Zambia. So we will share more about all our travels and our experiences going forward. So stay tuned into our episodes. We will try and be as active as we can, allowing, a time allowing, an opportunity allowing. But in the moment, what is pressing and very passionate for me was that we need to come and inform you, our listeners. We want to keep you actively informed about what is happening around the world, particularly with causes which we think are very important and are things that will help our society shift for the better. One of those situations is femicide, as Malisa has well introduced. We recently in Kenya had an entire country come together to protest against this horrendous act against women, of violence against women. So please sit back, relax, and stay informed.
Hello guys, hello everyone. This is your co-host Luiz Silva, and the Global Justice Voices Podcast is back. And we are very excited to reconnect with you. As Flo mentioned, we've been through a lot during this break, wonderful trips, and we've been also engaged in various activities of the Humphrey Fellowship, including amazing enhancement workshops covering diverse themes such as grant writing, artificial intelligence, and diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. Those were really enriching experiences, and we are eager to bring some of that knowledge into our conversations and interactions with you. Welcome back. Let us move to the topic of the day.
So for our listeners out there who might not know what femicide is, well, I can simply put it as femicide is the intentional killing of women or girls, or simply put, females, just because of their gender. That is what femicide is. Now, femicide presents a grim reality across the globe, all over the planet. In Brazil, the femicide rate is reported to be about 3.5, or let me say 4 women per 100,000, with higher rates for those women of Afro descent. Despite laws against gender-based violence, femicide cases have increased by 39% from 2019 to 2020, and many perpetrators remain unpunished. In Kenya, over 500 women have been reported as victims of the vice between 2016 and 2024, with recent protests erupting in Nairobi and other centers of Kenya, where angry Kenyans have been demanding action from the government. Dear listeners, I am privileged to be in the company of a Brazilian and a Kenyan national who are my co-hosts, and because of that will be the focus of our discussion. Our discussion, while it has a global outlook, will focus on those two countries, and our two co-hosts or our two fellows here will give insights of their experiences of the vice in their respective countries. So I'll start with turning our focus to Brazil, a country which is known for its vibrant culture and diversity, and the carnival, of course. Yet, it harbors a dark reality of femicide, where gender-based violence remains a pervasive issue. The femicide rate in Brazil stands at about 4 per 100,000 women, disproportionately affecting women of Afro descent, or should I say, dark-skinned women. Despite the introduction of groundbreaking laws like the Maria da Penha law and the femicide law, femicide cases have surged to almost 40% from 2019 to 2020, underscoring a systemic failure to protect women adequately. Now, Luiz, you are from Brazil, and I'm sure you know a lot about the Maria da Penha case. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it properly, because it was a landmark case in Brazil's legal fight against domestic violence. Can you tell our viewers or our listeners more about this case and its significance and the current state of its implementation?
Absolutely, brother. So the case Maria da Penha, and also the Maria da Penha law, which is a 2006 law aimed to combat violence against women in Brazil. So both the law and the case are named after Maria da Penha, a courageous activist and the survivor of 2 attempted murders by her husband in the 80s. So this case marked a pivotal moment in Brazil's recognition of gender-based violence as one of our biggest social issues. Due to the resilience of this woman, and also due to some successful strategic litigation efforts put in place by civil society, this case reached the Inter-American System of Human Rights, and the law that was passed represented a culmination of those recommendations that were issued by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Maria da Penha's laws establish some comprehensive measures to protect women, including specialized jurisdictions and stricter punishment for offenders. However, there are lots of logistical and cultural barriers to properly enforce this legislation. You gave us the data concerning our high femicide rate, and if we look at the same information with another perspective, and I'm talking about 2023 updated numbers, the fact is that a woman dies every 6 hours in Brazil just because she's a woman. And from those cultural barriers I mentioned, I would highlight this culture of machismo that is ingrained in our society, meaning an idea that one simply does not believe in any possibility of gender equality, and that the roles assigned to men, for example, should always prevail to those that are assigned to women. And this serves as an ideological justification, a kind of ideological justification for those men who commit these crimes of violence.
Speaking of machismo, how do these things, or do these cultural attitudes impact on the efforts to combat femicide in Brazil? Can you shed more light on this issue of machismo?
So, as I was saying, machismo, or I was looking up a translation here, male chauvinism, if that makes sense. It's a kind of exaggerated masculine pride, something that is deeply rooted in the Brazilian society and has a significant role in perpetuating violence against women. And that's the thing, it's not only about individual acts of violence, but also a culture that sometimes excuses or even glorifies the way that men behave, the male dominance, and this also leads to a minimization of femicide, a minimization of domestic violence. So changing this mindset is the crucial, but the challenge. I truly believe that education and awareness campaigns targeting the men, targeting young people and men are essential to change these attitudes.
Luiz, as a professional in this sector, working in the justice sector, I know you're a judicial civil servant, you work for the judiciary. What would you say are the major challenges in your experience that you encounter or that Brazilian authorities encounter in implementing effective measures against femicide in Brazil? I know Brazil is quite a vast country. And how are activists and the government working together in addressing this issue?
The challenges are several. The first one being this one I mentioned about the machismo culture. On the one hand, I truly believe that we have a progressive legal framework designed to protect women. On the other, and those are the challenges, the implementation is often hampered by inadequate use of resources, lack of training for law enforcement and judicial officials, insufficient data collection on gender-based violence. So those are the main challenges, and there are some efforts to address these challenges. I can mention the judiciary branch taking proactive steps to ensure that trials in every court consider the gender perspective, aiming to prevent the biases and discrimination based on gender. So last year, the National Council of Justice successfully passed a regulation that established the mandatory adoption of some guidelines that were outlined in a protocol named Protocol for Trial with a Gender Perspective. And this should be adopted by all the branches of the judiciary. Of course, that's one of the many first steps that should be taken by different areas of the public sector to change the culture, and this must be done always considering the demands of civil society.
Thank you very much, Luiz. It's clear from what you're saying that a lot is being done. However, it is still not enough, and for it to be comprehensive or for it to be effective, for any interventions to be effective in tackling femicide in Brazil, what is required is a comprehensive approach that addresses both legal enforcement and cultural change. And it requires a multifaceted and multi-sectorial and multi-stakeholder approach to this. Now, let's cross the Atlantic and move closer to the Indian Ocean, to the eastern side of Africa, and cross over to Kenya, a country with its own unique challenges and struggles against the backdrop of a spike in femicide. Between 2016 and 2024, Kenya has witnessed a reported over 500 women who have been killed in a spate of femicide, and a development which has sparked outrage and demands for stiffer or more concrete governmental action. Despite this, the response has been reportedly slow, and many Kenyans feel that not enough is being done to protect women and girls in Kenya. Florence, before we came live, we talked about the Justice for Liz case, which became a symbol of the fight against femicide and gender-based violence in Kenya. Can you tell us more about this and its impact and the broader implications for Kenyan society?
Yes, Malisa, the beginning of this year was very eye-opening for a lot of Kenyans. The fact that femicide is still very persistent in our communities rose public outcry, and there was 2 very big protests that happened in Nairobi and in Mombasa, as you mentioned. And this is because of the fact that there was a case that happened in 2013 involving a 16-year-old girl who's named Liz for legal purposes. It's not a real name, but Liz was gang raped by 6 men in Busia County in Kenya. And after that brutal attack, the perpetrators dumped her body in a pit latrine, leaving her for dead. And she suffered injuries, including a spinal injury and obstetric fistula, which left her incontinent and requiring the use of a wheelchair. Can you believe that? It's just horrific. Horrendous, as you said. So when Liz identified her 3 attackers, the police actually initially just punished them by making them cut grass at the police station, rather than prosecuting them under Kenya's Sexual Offences Act, which carries a minimum 15 years sentence for rape. shocking. Like, I can't even imagine. But this lenient response was what sparked outrage in both in Kenya and internationally. And there was a social media campaign, #JusticeForLiz, which nearly 2 million signatures demanding proper prosecution, was signed by these 2 million people. And then women's rights groups also called for protests in the streets, pressuring Kenyan governments to take the case seriously. And after this public pressure, it was only in 2015 that 3 of Liz's attackers were convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison and 7 years for causing grievous bodily harm. And the verdict was seen as a breakthrough for Kenya's justice system in addressing sexual violence. However, these 3 perpetrators, they still remain at large, and Liz and her family had to face threats and had to relocate for their safety. And this case only, I think more than anything, highlights the broader challenges in Kenya around reporting, investigating, and prosecution of sexual violence cases, including negative cultural attitudes, the lack of resources, and corruption. So the fact that it was still recurrent, there were so many cases reported just in January this year, and the fact that Liz's case was such a public event, and Kenyans had thought that this would be transforming how things would happen in the future, but we're in 2024, and something that happened in 2013 is still not, the law is still not acting the way Kenyans, the response by the law, by the country, by the police is not where it should be at. And this was what made Kenyans rise against and protest. It was such a big demonstration. I was so sad to have missed out on it, but I'm so proud of my country people for standing against this very, very important issue. And I see that, coming together and communities fighting in unison against such atrocities will build better societies for us. We look to a future of Kenyan women, victims, any victim of gender-based violence getting the legal recourse that they deserve, the justice and access to it, without having any cultural attitudes or perceptions against it, or it not being prioritized for whatever reason, whether it's lack of resources and corruption. Justice must be afforded to anyone who needs it immediately and with full time and efficient efforts towards achieving it.
It's very heartening, or it's very encouraging that the entire Kenyan nation had to rise up in a campaign called Justice for Liz, so that the perpetrators of the crime could face stiffer punishment or could be prosecuted for stiffer crimes from the initial crimes that they were charged with. Now, tell me something, Florence, or tell our listeners something. How do societal attitudes, we've heard from the Brazilian perspective, in a similar vein, how do societal attitudes and cultural norms in Kenya contribute to the perpetuation of femicide and gender-based violence?
In Kenya, as in many societies, patriarchal norms and unequal power dynamics play a significant role. These societal attitudes often excuse violence against women or blame victims, which discourages survivors from coming forward and seeking justice. Moreover, the normalization of such violence in some communities makes it challenging to enact change. Addressing these deep-rooted beliefs is crucial for moving forward.
Thank you for your answer, Florence, and your perspective. It is clear that societal attitudes are very influential in perpetuating this fight. Now, what would you say are the main challenges? Because clearly it is a challenge. What would you say are the main challenges in tackling femicide in Kenya? And what measures are being proposed or currently being implemented to address this issue?
The challenges are numerous, including inadequate legal frameworks, slow judicial processes, and limited resources for victim support. One of the key measures being advocated for is the legal recognition of femicide as a distinct crime, which would allow for more focused legal action and support for victims. Additionally, there is a push for implementation of comprehensive education on gender-based violence, improved training for health and law enforcement officers, and a greater representation for women in government to ensure that policies reflect the needs and rights of women.
Although results are slow, as you say, it seems like there's a significant movement in Kenya in an attempt to address this femicide problem. Of course, a lot more needs to be done, but we are grateful that there is some movement to address this issue and also to support the survivors. How then can the international community and individuals across the African continent contribute to these efforts?
The international community can play a crucial role by supporting Kenyan activists and organizations working on the ground, sharing knowledge and best practices for combating gender-based violence, and advocating for policy changes both within Kenya and globally. I know very well that, there are very many organizations working on this. If you search for the hashtag Justice for Liz or search for hashtag Total Shutdown KE, you will find so many organizations that are working on this, and we will try and attach some of these links on the podcast episode so that you can follow and try and support these international organizations. Individuals can contribute by raising awareness on the issue, supporting survivor-led initiatives, and pressing their own governments to take a stand against femicide and support international efforts to combat gender-based violence.
Just to hold you guys, I think we need to dive deeper into this subject and understand the cultural context or the underlying cultural attitudes and societal norms that contribute to femicide, of course with our focus still on Brazil and Kenya. As we dive deeper, we aim to uncover the roots of gender-based violence and the cultural dynamics that tend to normalize such acts. I mean, this is a notorious problem the world over, and we need to get insights into how these cultural contexts fuel the scourge of femicide and what can be done to challenge and change these deeply ingrained norms. Luiz, back to you. You said earlier that what you termed machismo, or should I say machismo? I don't know, it's a Portuguese word, so I guess you should pronounce it properly. Machismo plays a significant role in shaping attitudes towards women. Can you expand on this machismo and how this cultural belief system contributes to femicide?
You got it right at the first time, brother. It's machismo, which at this point our dear listeners already know that machismo culture emphasizes the dominance of men over women, and this is deeply embedded not only in Brazil but worldwide. We see the example of Kenya. This belief system not only justifies this male dominance but also consider violence against women as something trivial, even putting the woman in a position of a property or as someone that deserves to be punished. It's a toxic mindset that's being perpetuated from generation to generation through socialization in families, communities, and through the media. There's even a popular saying in Brazil that goes like this: em briga de marido e mulher, ninguém mete a colher. In a fight between a husband and a wife, no one gets involved, meaning that the community should not get involved when they witness a situation of domestic violence. And this is also a symptom of this sexist culture that has some important repercussions in our lives. Again, the path for changing this is through education and also by promoting another kind of masculinity, one that considers the concept of gender equality as fundamental.
Thank you very much, Luiz. I'll turn to Kenya now. And Florence, similar to what Luiz said and what he termed machismo, you spoke of patriarchal structures which are similarly entrenched. How, in your view, do these structures influence femicide and violence generally against women? And what initiatives, on top of what you said, are being put in place to address particularly the patriarchal structure? You spoke of measures that are there to kind of control femicide. And now my question is, are there any measures that are being put in Kenyan society to try and reverse the trend or to try and arrest these patriarchal structures that are influencing this femicide against women?
It's very challenging because patriarchal norms dictate that men are superior to women, which severely impacts women's rights and safety. These norms are reinforced by traditional practices and beliefs that devalue women's autonomy, contributing to a culture where violence against women is often excused or overlooked. So addressing these challenges involves multifaceted approaches. Education plays a crucial role, for example, with efforts to integrate gender studies into schools' curricula and the community programs aiming to shift perceptions and attitudes. These are ways in which we can combat this. Women's rights organizations in Kenya are tirelessly working to empower women, advocating for their rights and offering support to survivors of violence. These organizations also engage men and boys in conversations about respect, equality, and the harmful impacts of patriarchal beliefs.
Thank you for that perspective, Florence. I'll now turn to our dear listeners. Dear listeners, it is very clear, it is abundantly clear that in both Brazil and Kenya, and of course in other parts of the world, cultural norms and societal attitudes play a significant role in perpetuating femicide and other forms of gender-based violence. Challenging and changing these deeply rooted and long-standing beliefs is essential for creating a safer, more equitable world for women and girls. As we conclude this episode, it is evident that the fight against femicide is not only a legal battle, but also a cultural one. By addressing the root causes of gender inequality and reshaping societal attitudes, we can begin to dismantle the structures that allow femicide to thrive. As we break off, ladies and gentlemen, it is clear that femicide is a global problem, not only restricted to Kenya and Brazil, but in many places of the world, deeply intertwined with systematic injustices. We must work collectively to dismantle these cycles and create a world where all lives are valued equally. Thank you, Luiz, and thank you, Florence, for joining me in this crucial conversation. And to our dear listeners, our faithful listeners of the Global Justice Voices podcast, thank you as well. We hope that by this presentation, you have gained an understanding that will help in addressing the root causes of femicide in our communities, as we can strive to a more just and equitable world and safer communities for our women and girls. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged. And as we always say, subscribe, subscribe, subscribe.